Good evening, everybody. We're going to talk about the hurricane season, which is coming up here soon. It's already started in the Pacific officially. So we'll start with a look at the global sea surface temperature anomalies, just to kind of get a feel of what we're working with. In the Pacific, we have kind of these cooler anomalies along the equator. Not really a full La Nina, more of what we call a cool neutral event right now, where it's below zero, but not the full La Nina criteria. If we look at this cool water off of California, that's what we call a negative PDO signature. Both of these things tend to be a little bit less favorable for the East Pacific because of the storms that develop here. Don't have much warm water to work with. So we'll see. Right now, it's probably looking like a quieter year for the East Pacific, but we'll have to see how that evolves. Then if we go look at the Atlantic, kind of got a mixed bag because typically the classic look you want to see in the Atlantic for activity is sort of this warm horseshoe along the man development region here, and then extending to the East Atlantic. So we have part of that. The Caribbean is warm, Northeast Atlantic is warm, but we kind of have this big area out here in the central MDR that's below average, and then warmer water off the east coast of the U.S. And so this part, the Caribbean, the Northeast Atlantic looks more like a positive Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. This cooler water in the central MDR and this warmer water further north looks more like a negative AMO signature. So kind of these competing factors. And then in terms of the Atlantic Nino, right now we've got some cooler water upwelling here, but then we also have some warm water trying to work its way here. So kind of everything in the Atlantic is sort of mixed right now, and how these factors change over the next couple weeks and months as we head into the season is going to probably tell us a lot about whether we're an average season or climb more above average. And with more seasonal forecasts coming out soon, I think NOAA's is coming out soon. I think you'll probably see average a little bit above, but exactly how far above is going to depend on how these water temperatures evolve. But with like I said, with the lack of El Nino in the Pacific, with this cooler water here, you probably won't have very much wind shear across the Caribbean, so I think we'll definitely see an opportunity for development and for storms to move west. But just another way to look at that is to look at the ocean heat content over the Atlantic Main Development Region. This is Brian McNulty's awesome page, one of several that he maintains. So this is average over that area, and this again is ocean heat content, so it's the subsurface temperatures as well. You can see that last year was just sort of off the charts, record warm. This year, so far, we've been following a little bit more along the lines of 2023, but 2023, right about now, is when it really started to warm up. That's when this kind of crazy warming we saw started to happen. So right now, we're definitely running above average still, but it seems like we might be on more of a normal pace compared to the crazy warmth we've seen in the Atlantic the last couple of years. So something to keep in mind as we start to think about what the season might look like. But in the East Pacific, like I said, May 15th is when the season officially starts, and the National Hurricane Center is monitoring an area for some slight development in about 7 days. And we're going to look at why that is, but the first thing we're going to do is back up a little bit and talk about something that you may have heard called the MJO. And if you're a meteorologist or a tropical expert, you may have already heard of this, but I'll just explain it for those who haven't. The MJO is basically a pulse of upward motion or convection that happens in the tropics. Typically, it starts off in the Indian Ocean there, and then propagates eastward. And you have the upward motion phase, which leads to rainfall. Precipitation tends to favor more tropical development. Then you have the sinking motion on the other side of it, and that's where you have dry weather, sunny. It tends to suppress tropical cyclones. And then this signal moves from west to east, from west moves east across the tropics. Typically with about a 30 to 60 day return period. So when we talk about the MJO, we talk about different phases. Phase 1 and 2 tend to be the most favorable for the Atlantic, and maybe into phase 3 where you have rising motion over Africa and the Indian Ocean. That tends to favor strong tropical waves that move off Africa. It favors lower shear over the Atlantic. And then as we move into to phases 4, 5, and 6, the rising motion kind of moves eastward, and the Pacific is favored for more convection. If you track this over time, you can kind of see how this signal moves eastward with time. And so, again, these phases 1, 2, and 3 tend to be more favorable for the Atlantic, and then as it moves over into the Pacific, you get more upward motion here, which tends to lead to sinking over the Atlantic and also stronger wind shear. And so that's what we'll be seeing over the next couple weeks, and that's why we're not really expecting an early start to the Atlantic. But in the Pacific, you can see phases 4 and 5. Tends to favor more convection there. So one of the diagrams we like to look at is what's called a Hofmahler diagram, and you can track this. The green is basically areas of large-scale rising motion. The orange is areas of large-scale sinking. You can see right now our MJO, or also Kelvin wave, kind of a similar feature that moves east. It's rising is over the eastern Indian Ocean, but it's starting to move to propagate east. And so as we move into the last week of May, it's going to be sort of centered here over the eastern Pacific. And then eventually, we get to mid-June, it'll move over into the Caribbean and Atlantic, and that's when we might start to see a chance at our first Atlantic storm of the year there in early to mid-June. But if we look at some of our models, the GFS shows a system trying to form in the East Pacific in about a week or so. We're going to have a surge of trade winds through the Caribbean, and as that moves that moves west into the Eastern Pacific, it'll lead to convergence and air starting to pile up here south of Mexico, and we may get something try to form again as that convective pulse moves in from the west as well. Some of our other models show the same thing. The ECMWF from this morning shows about 7 to 8 days out, so we're sort of in the longer to medium range here, but models are pretty consistent. AI models are kind of a new thing, and that's showing something similar. So all of our dynamical and AI models are showing that. It's a little bit of a ways out. Ensembles, this is the ECMWF ensemble showing something over a pretty decent signal within the next 10 days south of Mexico. Again, if you look at the Atlantic, not much going on at all, because that convective pulse is still going to be in the Pacific, and we'll probably be looking in the 2 to 3 week range before the Atlantic is really having a chance. But that's pretty normal. If you look at climatology, the East Pacific typically starts faster than the Atlantic. So right now we are right about here in mid-May. So the East Pacific often does start to ramp up by the end of May before June. Whereas if you go to the Atlantic, we are here in the pre-June phase. You do occasionally get storms, but it's rarer, and really, obviously, the Atlantic doesn't ramp up till much later. So, really, things are very normal. This early season activity doesn't really tell us much about what's coming later. Once things are more favorable for the Atlantic to try to get something going, it'll likely be in the Northwest Caribbean or Gulf. That's one of the areas where the water's warm enough, and typically, once you get this rising motion, things can try to form here in the early season. And obviously still you also have, as you get into June, that this area south of Mexico is favorable in the East Pacific side as well. So seems like as this MJO signal propagates east, we're probably going to be following a pretty typical pattern with our first chance in the East Pacific and maybe the Atlantic in a few weeks, and we'll keep an eye on that and see how things evolve, and certainly also see how our SST pattern and large-scale climate signals evolve. And like I said, I think NOAA's coming out with the seasonal hurricane outlook this week, and I know some other agencies will be doing that as well. So stay tuned for those, and just keep an eye on the tropics. Obviously, this busy season can have very few impacts, or a quiet season can have one big impact where you live. But certainly there's some scientific interest in these, and it's good for hurricane awareness. So stay safe, everyone, and I'll talk to you later.